"You're holding me back," she said with a look that pierced through every ounce of patience I had left. I thought those words were just another outburst in a long line of arguments. But I was wrong. They became the moment I realized that sometimes, no matter how much you give, no matter how hard you try, some people will always see you as the chain instead of the anchor. And when she accused me of being the reason her life wasn't what she wanted it to be, I made the decision that changed everything. I let go, permanently. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Marcus, and if you had met me 3 years ago, you might have thought I had it all figured out. I was working steadily as a project coordinator in a mid-sized architectural firm in Seattle. Nothing flashy, but stable enough to give me a sense of purpose. I wasn't rich, but I was secure, disciplined, and grounded. My life had a rhythm: work during the week, catch up with friends over the weekends, and visit my parents once every couple of weeks for family dinners. I wasn't the kind of man who needed extravagance. I valued loyalty, small joys, and the kind of consistency that could be relied upon when storms came. And that's when Elena entered my life, sweeping in with the kind of energy that could light up an entire city block. We met at a colleague's engagement party. She wasn't supposed to be there. She was a friend of the bride's cousin, but fate has a way of orchestrating meetings you'll never forget. She was vibrant, the kind of woman who spoke with her hands and made you feel like you were the only person in the room when she laughed at your jokes. At that moment, I wasn't thinking about red flags or warning signs. I was thinking about how someone so full of life could even notice me. She wore confidence like it was tailored. And though she spoke of dreams that seemed larger than the sky, she had this vulnerability in her eyes when she asked me about my job. As if stability was something she admired, but didn't know how to hold on to. Our first conversation stretched over an hour, and by the end of the night, she had my number saved under Marcus the architect, even though technically I wasn't an architect yet. I remember going home and replaying that interaction in my mind, feeling something stir in me that I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Hope that maybe life wasn't just about going through the motions. Maybe, just maybe, Elena was going to be the missing piece that made everything brighter. In the weeks that followed, our connection grew at an intensity that left me dizzy. She was spontaneous, suggesting midnight drives to nowhere, dragging me to hole-in-the-wall diners that became our places, and filling my once predictable weekends with stories worth retelling. I'd never met anyone who could both exhaust me and thrill me at the same time. She worked as a freelance photographer, chasing gigs and creating art through her lens. She would show me her shots of landscapes and portraits with such passion that I began to believe she was destined for something extraordinary. Her world was made of dreams, while mine was built on concrete and deadlines, but somehow the contrast felt like balance. For a while, we were perfect in our imperfections. She pulled me out of my comfort zone, and I gave her a safe place to land when her chaotic world threatened to swallow her whole. She'd often tell me, "Marcus, you're the calm in my storm," and I believed that was a good thing. I believed that what we had was exactly what love was supposed to look like. Two different worlds colliding and learning to coexist. Looking back now, I see the cracks even in those early days, the tiny fractures hidden beneath laughter and late-night talks. But in the moment, all I saw was possibility. Our relationship moved faster than I anticipated. Within 6 months, she was practically living with me, her clothes taking up half my closet space and her toothbrush perched next to mine. My apartment, once orderly and predictable, became cluttered with camera equipment, half-finished photo projects, and the scent of her lavender candles. I didn't mind. In fact, it made me feel alive, like I had finally found someone worth adjusting my life for. I was proud to introduce her to my friends, proud to watch her charm my parents over Sunday dinners, proud to stand beside her like we were building something lasting. But as much as I thought we were settling into a rhythm, Elena had other ideas. She thrived on movement, on constant change, and while I found joy in stability, she began to see it as a cage. I didn't recognize it then, not fully, but sometimes when I'd talk about my plans for the future, saving for a house, climbing the career ladder, creating a foundation she could lean on, her smile wouldn't quite reach her eyes. There was a flicker of something there, something I couldn't place. Dissatisfaction, maybe. or restlessness. I told myself it was nothing, that every couple had their differences. And besides, hadn't she said I was her calm? Didn't she want that? If I had known that one day she would turn those very qualities into accusations, if I had known she would one day call me her burden instead of her anchor, maybe I would have asked more questions. Maybe I would have paid closer attention. But at the time, I believed we were building something that could withstand any storm. I couldn't have been more wrong. Life with Elena was like riding a wave that never quite let me touch solid ground. At first, I convinced myself that this was exactly what I needed after years of monotony, but in truth, I was always trying to catch my breath. She had a way of pulling me into her world, a place where schedules were suggestions and responsibilities could be postponed if inspiration struck. I was used to the comfort of planning things weeks in advance, but with her, I learned that plans could change in an instant. One Friday evening, after I'd wrapped up a long week at work, she barged into my apartment, her camera bag slung over her shoulder, eyes sparkling with excitement. "Marcus," she said breathlessly, "I just got invited to this pop-up exhibition downtown. It's tonight, only for a few hours. We have to go." I blinked at her, already picturing the leftovers I had planned to heat up for dinner and the early night I wanted to claim, but one look at her enthusiasm and my reluctance melted away. We went, and I watched her mingle effortlessly with other artists, laughing and exchanging stories like she belonged to a different universe. That night, she introduced me as her rock, which made me feel strangely proud. It was a reminder that despite her whirlwind lifestyle, she still saw me as essential to her world. Moments like those made me believe that our differences were strengths. While she thrived in uncertainty, I thrived in reliability, and somehow we made it work. But I couldn't deny the subtle shifts that began to creep in. Whenever I'd suggest staying in to cook together or watching a film, she would sigh, roll her eyes, and call me boring in a half-joking tone. "You're too safe, Marcus," she would say with a playful grin that didn't always feel playful. "Don't you ever just want to live a little?" I tried to brush it off, reminding myself that every couple teased each other. But the words stuck with me long after she'd fallen asleep beside me. I started wondering if she was right, if my steady life was really as uninspired as she made it sound. At first, I tried harder to keep up with her, thinking maybe the answer was to adapt more. I joined her on impromptu road trips, stayed out later than I should on weeknights, and even skipped a few work gatherings to accompany her to photography gigs. The problem was, while she came alive in those moments, I felt like I was slowly burning out. She didn't notice, or maybe she didn't want to. She'd look at me with those wide, expectant eyes, and I couldn't bring myself to disappoint her, even if it meant disappointing myself. That's when I began to realize how much of myself I was sacrificing to keep her happy. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Things escalated when she started landing bigger jobs. A well-known lifestyle magazine picked up one of her series, and suddenly she was getting offers to travel out of state. She was ecstatic, and I was genuinely happy for her. I wanted her to succeed, but her newfound momentum came with a shadow. She began comparing her life trajectory with mine, her voice sharp whenever she spoke about the future. "You're content just staying in your little bubble," she accused one night when I told her I couldn't join her last-minute trip to Los Angeles because of a crucial meeting at work. "Don't you see how much more there is out there? You're holding yourself back. And me too." The words stung more than I let on. I wasn't holding her back. If anything, I thought I was the one cheering the loudest for her. But in her eyes, my stability was no longer comforting. It was suffocating. I remember lying awake that night, staring at the ceiling while she scrolled through her phone beside me, already planning her next adventure. It hit me then how differently we saw the world. For me, love was about building a future together, finding strength in partnership, and supporting one another through ups and downs. For her, love seemed to be about riding the highs and escaping anything that felt too grounding. She didn't want an anchor. She wanted wings, and somehow I had become the weight she resented. Still, I wasn't ready to give up. I kept telling myself that this was just a phase, that once she realized I wasn't her enemy, we'd find common ground again. I made an effort to attend her showcases, clapping the loudest in the crowd, even when I didn't understand half the jargon being tossed around by her artist friends. I listened to her frustrations when clients undervalued her work, reminding her of her worth and talent. I thought these were the things a partner was supposed to do. And maybe they were, but they were never enough for her. One night, while we were having dinner at a small Thai restaurant she adored, the tension between us boiled over. I had just finished telling her about a promotion I was in line for, excited to share the possibility of more security and growth in my career. Instead of celebrating, she frowned. "So that means even less time for us, right? More of you chained to your desk while I'm trying to actually live?" Her voice carried across the table, sharp enough to make the couple next to us glance over. I tried to explain that the promotion meant better pay, better opportunities, maybe even a chance to save for the future we used to talk about. But she shook her head, her eyes narrowing. "That's your dream, Marcus, not mine. You don't get it. You're holding me back from the life I'm meant to have." The words sank into me like a blade. It wasn't the first time she hinted at feeling restrained, but it was the first time she said it so bluntly. I sat there, chopsticks frozen in my hand, staring at her while she took another bite as if she hadn't just demolished the foundation of everything we were building. I realized in that moment that her definition of love and mine were worlds apart. And though I didn't say it out loud, something inside me began to shift. After that dinner at the Thai restaurant, I couldn't shake her words. "You're holding me back." They echoed in my head long after we left the place, long after I dropped her off at our apartment and drove around aimlessly for half an hour just to clear my thoughts. I tried to make sense of it. How could the same stability that once made her feel safe now feel like chains to her? I wasn't sure if it was me she resented or the life she thought I represented. But once the thought was planted, I began to notice subtle signs that had been there all along, signs I had ignored or excused away because I wanted so badly for us to work. She would cancel plans we made so she could chase some spontaneous opportunity. She began spending more nights away, either with friends or staying late at shoots, often returning home long after midnight. When I confronted her gently about communication, she brushed me off with a laugh. "Marcus, not everything has to be scheduled like a board meeting," she'd say, dismissing my concerns as if they were just quirks of my personality rather than legitimate feelings of neglect. The first time I really felt the ground shift beneath me was one Saturday morning. I had planned a simple day, make breakfast, maybe take a walk together by the waterfront, just us without distractions. But when she woke up, she was buzzing with energy, her phone pressed to her ear as she agreed to join a last-minute road trip with some of her photography friends to Portland. "It'll only be for the weekend," she said, throwing clothes into her bag while I stood there with 2 plates of pancakes growing cold on the table. "You understand, right? Opportunities like this don't come twice." I forced a smile and told her it was fine. But as I watched her leave, suitcase in one hand and camera bag in the other, a hollow feeling settled in my chest. I realized I had become the placeholder in her life, the safe spot she returned to when the world exhausted her, but never the priority. When she returned 2 days later, her stories were full of excitement. Photo shoots at hidden spots, new connections she had made, laughter that I wasn't a part of. She didn't notice the stack of uneaten pancakes still sitting in the fridge, or the way my voice wavered when I said I missed her. Her world was expanding, and I was shrinking within it. That's when the warning signs became harder to ignore. Every time I tried to talk about our relationship, she would steer the conversation toward her goals, her dreams, her frustrations with anyone who didn't see her brilliance. I wanted to support her, and I did, but I couldn't ignore the gnawing sense that she no longer saw us as a partnership. It became clearer one evening when I invited her to dinner with my colleagues. I thought it would be good for her to see my world, to understand that while I wasn't chasing art or fame, my career mattered to me. She arrived late, already a little tipsy, and throughout the evening she dismissed small talk with my coworkers as, quote, too mundane. Later, in the car, she complained that she felt suffocated by, quote, boring people with boring lives. I didn't argue with her, but her words stung. Those boring people were my colleagues, my friends, people who worked hard every day. To me, there was dignity and stability, but to her, it was an anchor tied to her ankles. The fight started small, then grew sharper. She began accusing me more openly of being too controlling, though I never demanded she stop her pursuits. All I ever asked for was time, consideration, balance. "You don't get it," she snapped one night when I questioned why she bailed on a family dinner with my parents at the last minute. "I'm not like you. I don't want to be stuck in routines for the rest of my life. I need freedom, Marcus." I need to breathe." I stared at her, wondering how she didn't see that I wasn't asking her to give up her dreams. I was asking her to make space for us in them. The moment that truly marked the shift, the point I knew we were sliding down a slope we couldn't climb back from, came during a small gathering at a mutual friend's house. A few of us were sitting around sharing stories, and when someone asked Elena about her relationship, she laughed and said, "Marcus is great, but sometimes I feel like I'm dating my dad, always checking in, always wanting things a certain way." Everyone laughed, including her, but I sat there frozen, my face burning. She brushed it off as a joke, but I knew she meant it. I wasn't her partner in her eyes anymore. I was a figure holding her back, someone to rebel against. In private, I told her how much those words hurt me, but she rolled her eyes. "You're too sensitive. It was just a joke." But I knew better. Jokes carry truths that people don't want to say outright. From that point on, I began to sense that she was slowly building a case against me in her mind, a list of reasons why she couldn't be happy with me. And no matter how much I tried to prove otherwise, no matter how much I bent myself to accommodate her, the narrative she was creating grew stronger. What I didn't realize then was that this was only the beginning. The warning signs were piling up like storm clouds, and though I tried to convince myself that love was enough to weather them, deep down, I knew the storm was inevitable. I just didn't know how destructive it would become, or how much of myself I would lose in the process of trying to hold us together. For a while, I kept convincing myself that things would turn around, that the Elena I first met, the woman who told me I was her calm in the storm, was still in there somewhere. I told myself the arguments were just growing pains, the kind every couple went through, and that if I held on tightly enough, we'd find our way back to each other. But the good times we shared became fewer and farther between, and when they did arrive, they felt more like temporary reprieves than genuine connection. Still, I clung to them, because when she smiled at me the way she used to, it was almost possible to forget the tension simmering beneath the surface. There was one evening in particular, a rare night when she agreed to stay in, and we cooked dinner together. She played her favorite records, we laughed about silly things, and for a brief window of time, I felt like we had rediscovered our rhythm. I remember thinking, this is it, this is what we need more of. But the very next day, she was gone before sunrise, chasing another spontaneous assignment, and I realized I had been clinging to a mirage. The more I tried to recreate those moments, the more she slipped away, and the harder I held on, the more she seemed to resent me. Her photography career began to pick up steam, and with it came new circles of friends who lived and breathed the same unpredictable lifestyle she adored. They were artists, musicians, dreamers, people who spoke in terms of possibilities and what-ifs rather than responsibilities. I tried to fit in when she dragged me along to their late-night gatherings, but I always felt like the odd one out. While they discussed travel plans to exotic places or debated the merits of experimental art, I sat quietly nursing a drink, wondering if any of them ever worried about rent, bills, or the next step in their careers. Elena thrived in their presence, her eyes lighting up in ways I hadn't seen in months when she was with me. And although she never said it directly, I could feel her unspoken comparisons, the way her life seemed to blossom when she was away from me, and dull when she returned to my steady, structured world. It was during one of these gatherings that I realized just how much things had shifted. Someone asked her if she ever felt tied down by being in a serious relationship, and she laughed lightly, glancing at me as if to gauge my reaction. "Sometimes," she said, her tone playful but laced with a truth I couldn't ignore. "Marcus is wonderful, but he's so grounded. And I don't know if I was meant to live with both feet on the ground." The group chuckled, but the words cut me deeply. I felt like I was being reduced to a metaphor for everything she didn't want, a symbol of a life she was desperate to escape. Driving home that night, she brushed it off when I brought it up, claiming it was just banter. But I couldn't shake the image of her surrounded by people who represented freedom to her while I symbolized restraint. The cracks in our relationship widened when I began noticing how often she avoided making plans with me. If I suggested a weekend getaway for the two of us, she would say she was too busy or that she might have a shoot come up. If I proposed dinners or movie nights, she would counter with excuses or simply forget altogether. The imbalance became glaring. I was always waiting for her, rearranging my life around her whims while she rarely adjusted hers for me. Still, I held on, believing that showing patience and support was what love required. But inside, I was beginning to feel invisible, like my needs didn't matter as long as hers were met. One evening, my parents invited us both over for a small family gathering. They liked Elena, though I suspected they had noticed the strain in our relationship long before I admitted it to myself. She promised she'd come, but when the day arrived, she called me an hour before dinner to say she couldn't make it because she had to meet with a potential client. I covered for her, telling my parents she was tied up with work, but I could see the disappointment in their faces. My mother squeezed my shoulder and said softly, "Marcus, don't lose yourself trying to keep someone else happy." Her words unsettled me because they struck too close to a truth I didn't want to face. Even my friends started to notice the changes in me. I was quieter, more withdrawn, often distracted. When they asked about Elena, I always painted the picture brighter than it was, not ready to admit that the woman I thought was my partner had become a stranger who only shared my bed. The good times, the laughter, the intimacy, the feeling that we were a team, still existed, but they were like fleeting flashes of sunlight between endless stretches of storm clouds. And each time they disappeared, I wondered if they would ever come back. The most painful part was realizing how much she had stopped seeing me, not physically, but emotionally. I could be sitting right next to her on the couch, trying to tell her about something that happened at work, and she would be scrolling through her phone, half listening, nodding absent-mindedly without ever looking at me. Once, I stopped mid-sentence to see if she'd notice, and she didn't. She just kept scrolling, as if my words were background noise. I told myself it was just a phase. But in my heart, I knew it was something more, a growing indifference that no amount of patience could mend. And yet, despite the constant dismissals, I still loved her. I loved her enough to keep trying, enough to hold on to the fragments of what we used to have, enough to hope against hope that things would change. That was the cruelest part of it all, that I was pouring myself into someone who had already started letting go of me. But I wasn't ready to see that truth fully, not yet. All I knew was that the good times had become rare jewels I hoarded, even as the cracks in our foundation widened with each passing day. The first real warning signs that could no longer be disguised as quirks or growing pains came slowly, like cracks forming in a wall you tell yourself are harmless until one day the structure begins to tremble. I had noticed her withdrawing, her interest in me waning, but I still convinced myself that if I remained steady enough, if I showed her unwavering support, we could find our balance again. But Elena had a way of letting her frustrations slip out in small, cutting remarks that stayed with me long after they left her lips. One evening, after a long day at work, I came home to find her sprawled across the couch editing photos on her laptop. I greeted her warmly, hoping for a quiet night together, but without looking up, she muttered, "Sometimes I wonder if you even understand me at all." I froze, unsure what I had done to deserve the remark, and when I asked her what she meant, she waved it off as though it wasn't important. But it was important, because it revealed the widening gap between us. It revealed that she had started to see me not as her partner, but as someone who couldn't possibly grasp the depths of her ambitions or the restlessness that fueled her. Another sign appeared when I discovered how she had begun seeking validation outside of our relationship. At first, it was subtle. Comments from other men on her social media posts that she didn't bother hiding from me. Inside jokes with colleagues she mentioned a little too often. I didn't want to be the jealous type, and I trusted her, but there was something in the way she lit up when she spoke about them that she no longer reserved for me. I remember sitting across from her at a cafe while she scrolled through her phone, grinning at a message she refused to show me. "It's just work," she said when I asked, but the way she guarded that screen told me otherwise. It wasn't that I believed she was unfaithful, but I knew she was chasing affirmations in places where I was no longer enough. The red flags became harder to dismiss during our arguments, which grew sharper and more frequent. She accused me of being too cautious, too rooted, too unwilling to leap into the unknown with her. "You're like an anchor," she said one night during a heated exchange, her eyes flashing with something between anger and desperation. "I need to fly, and you're holding me down." I wanted to tell her that anchors weren't meant to imprison but to provide safety in storms, to keep ships from being destroyed by chaos. But she didn't want safety. She wanted speed, recklessness, freedom without consequence. And no matter how I tried to reframe myself as her supporter, she only saw me as her cage. I noticed how her priorities shifted further away from us. She no longer asked about my day, no longer listened when I tried to share my thoughts or worries. She became consumed by her projects and the people who filled her calendar, leaving little space for me. Once, when I reminded her about a promise she had made to join me at a friend's birthday dinner, she shrugged and said, "I can't live my life around your schedule, Marcus. Don't make me feel guilty for wanting more." Her words struck me like a blow, not just because she had broken a promise, but because she was painting my desire for her presence as a form of control rather than a plea for companionship. The breaking point of these warning signs came on a quiet Tuesday night when I found myself alone at our apartment while she was out networking. I sat on the couch, staring at the flickering light of the muted television, wondering when I had started to feel like a guest in my own relationship. The walls around me were covered in her framed photographs, evidence of her talent and passion, but they also reminded me of how she had filled every corner of my life, while leaving me emptier with each passing day. I picked up my phone and scrolled through our old pictures together, smiling faces, laughter frozen in time, and I wondered how we had gone from that to this, from promises of forever to accusations of suffocation. The irony wasn't lost on me that I had once admired her free spirit, her hunger for adventure, the very qualities that were now tearing us apart. I had thought I could be the one to ground her without holding her back, that we could complement each other like yin and yang. But the warning signs told a different story. They told me that she no longer wanted what I offered, that my steadiness was now her prison, and that my love had become invisible against the backdrop of her growing ambitions. It was a painful realization, one I tried to deny by doubling down on patience and understanding, but no matter how much I gave, it was never enough. Perhaps the clearest sign of all came one night when she looked me directly in the eyes and said, "I don't know if we want the same things anymore." It wasn't shouted in anger or tossed out carelessly. It was spoken quietly, almost with resignation, but it cut deeper than any fight we'd had before. Because in that moment, I understood that she wasn't just questioning our future, she was already letting go of it. I should have listened then, should have acknowledged that she was telling me in her own way that her heart was no longer aligned with mine. But I wasn't ready to hear it. I wasn't ready to admit that the woman I loved was slipping through my fingers, not because I failed to hold on tight enough, but because she didn't want to be held at all. And so I did what I had always done. I ignored the warning signs, convinced myself that love was enough, and braced for the storm I somehow still hoped we could survive. The night everything came crashing down was not explosive in the way movies often portray breakups, with slammed doors and shouted insults echoing through the walls. It was quieter, more devastating because of the calmness with which it unfolded, like a blade sliding between ribs without warning. Elena and I had just finished a late dinner at home. I had cooked her favorite pasta dish, hoping to bridge the growing gap with something familiar, but she barely touched her plate, swirling the noodles around with her fork as though they were an obligation rather than a gift. I tried to spark conversation, asking about her latest gallery submission, but she answered with clipped sentences, her mind clearly elsewhere. Finally, after minutes of silence heavy enough to drown in, she put down her fork, folded her hands, and looked at me with a seriousness that made my stomach twist. "Marcus," she began, her tone too measured, too rehearsed, "we need to talk about us." Those words, dreaded and unavoidable, set my pulse racing. I nodded, bracing myself, though no amount of preparation could shield me from what came next. She told me that she felt stifled, that every time she looked at me, she saw the weight of a future she wasn't ready to commit to. "You're a good man," she said, which only made the sting sharper because goodness wasn't enough to keep her. "But I can't shake the feeling that being with you means sacrificing parts of myself I'm not ready to give up." I sat there stunned, the words digging into me like claws. I wanted to argue, to remind her of all the ways I had supported her, the sacrifices I had made for her career, the nights I had stayed up helping her prepare for exhibitions, the stability I had given her when her world spun too fast. But something in her eyes told me she wasn't seeking reassurance or debate. She was declaring her truth, and in that truth, I was no longer the partner she wanted. I asked her if there was someone else, my voice trembling more from fear than accusation. She shook her head, though her hesitation made me wonder. "It's not about another person," she insisted. "It's about me. I need space, freedom, air to breathe. And when I'm with you, Marcus, I feel like I'm suffocating." The word suffocating echoed in my mind, cruel in its finality, because I had only ever wanted to be her shelter, not her chains. I tried to keep my composure, but anger began to surface beneath the heartbreak. I asked her why she had stayed so long if she felt this way, why she had allowed me to build my life around her if she knew she would one day rip it away. Her response was a whispered apology, almost inaudible, but it carried with it the weight of every unspoken doubt she had harbored for months. The conversation stretched into the night, a pendulum swinging between accusations and confessions. She admitted that she had been considering this for a while, that every time we argued she felt more certain we were on different paths. She said she admired my stability but could not live with it, that she needed unpredictability and risk to feel alive. I told her that relationships weren't meant to be thrill rides, that they required compromise and balance, but my words fell flat against her conviction. "You don't understand," she said, her voice rising with frustration. "I don't want balance. I want to chase something bigger, something you can't give me." Those words shattered the last illusion I had clung to, that if I loved her enough, I could anchor her wandering heart. The breaking point came when I asked her directly, "So what are you saying? You don't love me anymore?" She looked away, tears gathering in her eyes, and that silence was the loudest answer I had ever received. I felt my chest tighten as though a weight had been dropped on it, but beneath the grief was a flicker of clarity. I realized then that I had been holding on to a version of Elena that no longer existed, a version who once believed in us, in building something lasting together. The woman sitting before me was a stranger wearing her face, and I couldn't keep pretending otherwise. We sat in silence for a long time after that, the kind of silence that swallows entire rooms. Finally she whispered, "I think it's best if we take a break." The words were a dagger cloaked in softness, but I understood their real meaning. Breaks were never about healing. They were about easing into endings. I nodded slowly, though every fiber of my being screamed against it. "If that's what you need," I managed to say, my voice barely holding steady. She nodded back, relief flickering across her expression, and in that moment I knew that her decision had already been made long before she said it aloud. That night, after she went to bed, I sat alone on the balcony with the city lights sprawling endlessly below me. I thought about all the times I had fought to prove myself worthy of her love, the countless sacrifices I had made, the dreams I had put on hold to give her room to chase hers. And now here I was, left with nothing but the echo of her accusations, that I was holding her back, that my love was a burden rather than a gift. The betrayal wasn't in her words alone, but in the fact that she had let me believe for so long that we were still moving forward together, when in reality she had already chosen another direction. I realized then that letting go wasn't just inevitable, it was necessary, because holding on to someone who saw me as a cage was no longer love, it was self-destruction. And though I wasn't ready to accept the permanence of what had just happened, a part of me already knew. Once I let go, there would be no turning back. In the days that followed that brutal conversation, I found myself replaying every detail with the same obsessive focus that someone might give to solving a riddle that had no answer, searching for cracks, for signs I might have missed, for clues that could explain why the woman I thought was my partner had come to view me as her prison. It wasn't just my own mind gnawing at me. The people around me began to notice too. My closest friend Damon, who had been in my life since high school, invited me out for coffee when he realized I had been ignoring calls and skipping social gatherings. When I sat down across from him, bleary-eyed and hollow from sleepless nights, he didn't waste time with pleasantries. "You look like hell, Marcus," he said bluntly, his concern masked by his trademark sarcasm. "What's going on with you and Elena?" The mention of her name was like pressing on a bruise, but I told him everything anyway. The dinner, the accusations, the way she had looked at me as if my presence was a weight tied around her ankles. He listened quietly, nodding now and then, his brow furrowing deeper with each detail until finally he sighed, leaned back, and crossed his arms. "Man, I hate to say it, but she's been checked out for a while. You've been carrying this thing alone and refusing to see the signs." Hearing it from him hit harder than I expected, because Damon wasn't one for exaggerations or dramatics. He was the kind of friend who told you the truth even when you didn't want to hear it. Especially when you didn't want to hear it. "You've been putting her first at every turn, and what has she done?" "Treat you like some kind of anchor holding her down," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "That's not love, Marcus. That's selfishness. His words settled in me like stones dropped into a pond, rippling outward as they collided with the fragments of denial I had been clinging to. Still, I tried to defend Elena, mumbling about her ambitions, her passion, how she just needed time to figure herself out. Damon leaned forward, eyes narrowing as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "You don't get it, do you? You're not supposed to be her training wheels. You're supposed to be her partner, and if she doesn't see that, then maybe she doesn't deserve you." Later that evening, I visited my sister Clara, who had always been a steady voice of reason in my life. Unlike Damon, she didn't hit me with blunt truths right away. She listened patiently as I spilled everything once more, her expression soft yet resolute. When I finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Marcus, love isn't supposed to feel like this constant test of endurance," she said gently. "It's supposed to lift you up, not break you down. If she thinks you're holding her back, that's her insecurity talking, not reality. You've given her more support than most people ever dream of getting. Don't twist yourself into knots trying to make sense of her excuses." Her words cracked something inside me, not because they were new, but because they aligned with what Damon had already said, forming a chorus of truth too loud to ignore. That night, lying awake in bed, I realized I had been living in denial for months, excusing behaviors, overlooking slights, convincing myself that love meant patience and sacrifice, when in reality it had become a one-sided effort. Elena had stopped meeting me halfway long ago, and I had been dragging both of us forward, too stubborn to admit we were already standing on opposite shores. The validation from those who knew me best was both a relief and a torment. It reassured me that I wasn't crazy, that my instincts weren't lying to me, but it also stripped away the last comfort of ambiguity. There was no fixing this. There was no magical solution waiting just beyond the horizon. The hardest part came when I saw Elena again a few days later. She returned home after spending the weekend at her friend's apartment, and the distance between us was more visible than ever. I wanted to confront her with what Damon and Clara had said, to demand accountability, but when I looked at her, exhaustion etched into her features, I felt only sadness. She didn't look like someone struggling with guilt. She looked like someone who had already stepped out of the relationship emotionally and was merely waiting for me to catch up. For the first time, I truly saw her detachment, the way her eyes no longer lit up when they met mine, the way her body language screamed retreat even when she stood just a few feet away. It was then I knew with absolute clarity that the external voices echoing around me weren't just opinions. They were reflections of a reality I had refused to face. The following week, I opened up further to my parents, who had been quietly concerned but hadn't pressed me until now. Over dinner, my father listened in silence as I recounted the situation, while my mother shook her head and muttered about how unfair Elena's accusations were. When I finished, my father finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "Son, sometimes people outgrow each other, and it has nothing to do with fault. But if she cannot recognize the man you are, then she does not deserve to share your journey. You can't hold on to someone who has already let go." Hearing it from him, a man I had always admired for his steady marriage and quiet strength, sealed the truth like a signature at the end of a letter. Everyone who mattered to me could see what I had been blind to. Elena had already chosen her path, and it no longer included me. The external validation, though painful, gave me a strange sense of liberation. It was as if I had been drowning underwater, gasping silently, while convincing myself I could hold out a little longer, and suddenly hands reached in and pulled me to the surface. I could breathe again, not because the pain was gone, but because I no longer carried it alone. Damon, Clara, my parents, they all saw me clearly. They all affirmed that my worth wasn't diminished just because Elena failed to recognize it. And slowly, very slowly, I began to believe it too. The breaking point came one rainy Saturday evening, the kind where the streets glistened under the weight of downpour, and the world outside seemed to mirror the storm inside my chest. Elena had been distant all week, coming home late from her studio, barely acknowledging me when she walked through the door, her answers clipped, her smiles forced if they appeared at all. I had tried to give her space, hoping she would eventually come back to me on her own, but deep down I already knew that waiting was an exercise in futility. That evening, as the rain tapped against the windows and thunder rolled distantly, she sat across from me in the living room, her posture rigid, her gaze fixed not on me, but on some invisible point in the distance. The silence was unbearable, pressing against me until I finally broke it. "Elena," I said, my voice trembling, We can't keep doing this. If there's something you need to say, just say it." She turned to me then, and for the first time in weeks her eyes held no hesitation. "Marcus," she said firmly, "I can't do this anymore. I can't be with you." The words were simple, almost cruel in their bluntness, but they cut deeper than any elaborate explanation could. I felt something inside me crack, a fissure that had been forming for months, finally splitting wide open. My instinct was to argue, to beg, to remind her of the years we had shared, the dreams we had once held together, but I stopped myself. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe it was clarity, but in that moment I realized that nothing I said would matter. Her decision had been made, and all that remained was my willingness to accept it. "So that's it?" I asked quietly, my voice breaking despite my efforts to keep it steady. She nodded, tears gathering in her eyes but not falling. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I just feel like you're holding me back. I need to live my life without feeling tied down, without feeling suffocated." There it was again, that word, suffocated. It echoed through the room like a death knell, confirming what I had already feared, that she didn't see me as a partner anymore, but as a chain around her neck. My chest tightened, but, strangely, beneath the pain, there was also a spark of resolve. I had been waiting for this moment, dreading it, yet also needing it to finally break free from the limbo we had been living in. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to meet her gaze. "If you feel like I'm holding you back," I said slowly, deliberately, "then I won't anymore. I'm letting go." The words tasted like ash in my mouth, but they carried a finality that even she seemed startled by. She opened her mouth as if to respond, but no words came out, only a soft gasp that lingered in the charged silence between us. I stood up, my legs shaking, as if I were learning to walk again, and walked into the bedroom. There, I began pulling out my belongings. Clothes, books, small mementos that had once felt at home in this space but now felt foreign, out of place. I packed with a strange detachment, as though I were watching someone else's life unravel. Elena hovered at the doorway, her arms crossed, tears streaming silently now, but she didn't stop me. She didn't ask me to stay. That silence spoke louder than any plea could have, confirming that she truly wanted this freedom, this life without me. When the bags were packed and stacked neatly by the door, I paused and looked around the apartment one last time. Every corner held memories. The couch where we had laughed until our sides hurt, the kitchen where we had cooked meals together, the balcony where we had whispered dreams under starlit skies. Now all of it felt like a museum of ghosts. As I grabbed my keys and slung the bags over my shoulder, Elena finally spoke again, her voice raw and fragile. "Marcus, I didn't mean for it to end like this." I stopped, my back to her, my grip tightening around the keys. "Neither did I," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. "But you made your choice, and now I'm making mine." I didn't look back as I walked out the door, the click of it closing behind me sounding like the final punctuation on a chapter I never thought I'd finish. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, the air cool and damp as I stepped into the night. I loaded my things into the car, each thud of the bags against the trunk echoing like a drumbeat of finality. When I slid into the driver's seat, I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, staring out at the wet streets reflecting the glow of streetlights. For the first time in months, I felt a strange mix of emptiness and liberation. Driving away from the apartment, I didn't feel triumphant or vindicated. I felt hollow, as though I had left a piece of myself behind. But within that hollowness was the faint outline of something new. A possibility, a chance to rebuild without constantly doubting my worth. Letting go permanently was the hardest decision I had ever made, but it was also the only one that honored my own dignity. As the city passed by in a blur of lights and shadows, I realized that this was what clarity looked like. Not a triumphant shout of victory, but a quiet, resolute acceptance that some battles are not meant to be fought forever. Some battles are meant to be laid down, so you can finally walk away. That night I checked into a small hotel on the edge of town, the kind of place where no one asked questions and anonymity wrapped around you like a blanket. As I lay on the stiff mattress, staring at the ceiling, exhaustion finally caught up with me. I closed my eyes and let the weight of the past months wash over me, not fighting it, not running from it, just allowing myself to feel the full scope of the loss. And yet, underneath the grief, there was a faint but undeniable sense of relief. For the first time in a long while, the constant tug-of-war between love and resentment was gone. In its place was silence, painful, yes, but also clean, like the air after a storm. I knew the hardest part wasn't over yet. The days ahead would test me in ways I couldn't yet imagine, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. Because I had finally let go. The morning after I walked away from Elena's apartment, I woke up in that small hotel room with sunlight creeping through the blinds, painting pale stripes across the bedspread. For a moment, in the hazy space between sleep and wakefulness, I forgot where I was, expecting to roll over and hear her humming in the kitchen or see her curled up beside me. But when reality came rushing back, it hit like a wave, washing over me with both grief and clarity. I had left. Permanently. The weight of that decision settled into my chest, but instead of crushing me, it felt strangely steadying, like finally setting down a heavy load I'd been carrying for far too long. I sat on the edge of the bed, head in my hands, and allowed myself to cry. Not out of regret, but out of release. Those tears were not for her alone. They were for the version of myself that I had abandoned to keep her happy, for the dreams I had shelved, for the time I could never get back. And when the tears finally subsided, I felt lighter, as though I had finally exhaled after months of holding my breath. In the weeks that followed, the adjustment was difficult. Habits are hard to break, and love, even when it has soured, leaves behind echoes that cling stubbornly. I would catch myself reaching for my phone to text her about something trivial, only to stop midway, remembering she was no longer mine to share with. I would drive past familiar places. A cafe where we used to linger on Sunday mornings, the bookstore where she once surprised me with a novel I'd been searching for, and feel a pang of loss so sharp it nearly doubled me over. But instead of letting those moments drag me back into despair, I forced myself to reframe them. Each memory became less about what I had lost, and more about what I had endured, a reminder that love can be both beautiful and destructive, and that surviving it takes strength. Slowly, new routines began to take root. I reconnected with Damon, who refused to let me wallow in isolation. He dragged me out to play basketball at the community court, reawakening a passion I had set aside when life with Elena consumed my time. Clara, ever the protective sister, invited me over for dinners where she and her kids filled the house with laughter, reminding me that family was a foundation that could never be eroded by heartbreak. I even started attending a local writer's workshop, something I had always dreamed of but never pursued because I worried Elena would dismiss it as impractical. Sitting among strangers who bared their souls through words made me realize how much of myself I had silenced, how many passions I had let wither in the shadows of someone else's ambitions. Each step forward was small, sometimes shaky, but together they began to form a new path. As time passed, the anger that had once burned hot began to cool into something softer, something closer to understanding. I didn't excuse Elena's words or the way she handled our unraveling, but I began to accept that her truth was simply incompatible with mine. She wanted a life untethered, full of risk and uncertainty, while I craved stability, partnership, and shared growth. Neither of us was wrong for wanting what we wanted, but we were wrong for pretending that love alone could bridge such fundamental differences. That realization brought me peace, because it shifted the narrative from one of blame to one of acceptance. We were two people whose journeys intersected for a time, and though the ending was painful, it didn't erase the good moments we had shared. The greatest change, however, was within myself. For so long, I had lived under the shadow of her accusation that I was holding her back, and unconsciously I had absorbed that as a reflection of my worth. But as I rebuilt my life, as I pursued passions and deepened relationships that had nothing to do with her, I realized how false that accusation had been. I wasn't a cage. I wasn't a burden. I was a man who had loved deeply, perhaps too deeply, and in doing so had lost sight of himself. Letting go wasn't just about freeing her. It was about freeing me, from her expectations, from her doubts, from the warped reflection of myself that I had accepted as truth. Months later, I ran into her by chance at an art exhibit downtown. She looked the same, elegant, poised, eyes still burning with the restless ambition that had once drawn me in. For a fleeting moment, the old ache returned, but it quickly dissolved into something else. Gratitude. She smiled faintly, perhaps out of politeness, and we exchanged a few words. There was no bitterness in me anymore, only a calm acknowledgement that we had once mattered to each other and now we didn't. As I walked away, I realized that the encounter hadn't reopened wounds. It had confirmed they had healed. Standing on that sidewalk, watching the city lights flicker against the evening sky, I reflected on how far I had come. The man who once begged for her love, who once twisted himself into knots to prove his worth, was gone. In his place stood someone stronger, clearer, and more grounded. I had learned that love should never come at the cost of your own identity, that support and compromise are only meaningful when they are mutual, and that sometimes letting go is the most powerful act of love you can give, not to the other person, but to yourself. To anyone listening to my story, I would say this: if someone ever convinces you that your love is a weight rather than a gift, don't waste your life trying to prove them wrong. Love is not supposed to suffocate, it's supposed to inspire. And if you find yourself shackled by accusations that diminish your spirit, don't be afraid to let go, no matter how much it hurts. Because on the other side of that pain lies freedom, healing, and the possibility of a life where you are not seen as a chain, but as a whole person worthy of love that uplifts rather than restrains. That day when Elena accused me of holding her back, I thought I had lost everything, but in reality, it was the day I began to find myself again. And though the road was long and difficult, I wouldn't trade the lessons I learned for anything. Because now, when I look in the mirror, I no longer see the man she claimed was suffocating her dreams. I see a man who knows his worth, who walks forward with clarity, and who will never again settle for a love that demands he diminish himself to make someone else feel free. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.